The Charge of the Life Brigade by Tennyson tells the story of a brigade consisting of more than 600 soldiers who rode on horseback into the Valley of Death. Valley of Death, the battlefield. For half a league. Half a league is almost 1.5 miles. They were obeying, the soldiers were obeying the command given by their leader or commander to charge the enemy forces that had been catching their guns. So the poem is about a battle fought between two groups. Not a single soldier was discouraged or distressed by the command to charge forward, even though all the soldiers realized that their commander, the leader, had made a terrible mistake. The soldiers, the 600 soldiers, understood that their commander had made a mistake by asking them to charge forward. But everyone kept quiet. No one was discouraged or distressed by the command because it is the duty of a soldier to obey the commander's words, the commander's order. Not a single soldier was discouraged or distressed by the command to charge forward, even though all the soldiers realized that their commander had made a terrible mistake. Someone had blundered, the poet says. The role of the soldier is to obey and not to make reply or not to reason why the commander had given a particular order. So the soldiers followed orders and rode into the valley of death. They were very sure that they were walking into the valley of death, the mouth of death or hell, but they had no privilege of asking some questions or raising some doubts. Being a soldier, it was their duty to blindly obey the order given by their leader. So the 600 soldiers were assaulted by the shots of shells or cannons. Cannons are big guns in front of them, behind them, to the left of them, to the right of them. Cannons to the left, cannons to the right. That means the soldiers were surrounded by cannons. Still, they rode courageously forward toward their own deaths. They knew they were walking into the jaws of death or into the mouth of hell, but still they went ahead because they had been asked to do so by their leader. The soldiers struck the enemy gunners with their unsheathed swords, sabres bay. So when they walked forward, they took out their swords, sabres bay, took out their unsheathed swords and charged at the enemy while the rest of the world watched the battle in wonder. They rode onto the artillery, smoke and broke through the enemy line. Artillery is used by the enemies. These 600 soldiers belonging to England had just swords in their hands, but the enemies had artillery cannons. So they rode into the artillery smoke, broke through the enemy line, destroying the Cossack and Russian enemies. The English are fighting against the Cossack and the Russian opponents. The Cossack and Russian opponents had artillery, they had cannons, but the English soldiers had just swords. Then they rode back from the offensive from the battlefield after attacking the enemy soldiers, but they had lost many men, so they were not the 600 anymore when they came back. More than 600 walked into the jaws of death, but when they returned, many were missing because they had perished in the war. Cannons behind and on both the sides of the soldiers now assaulted them with shells and shots as a brigade rode back from the mouth of hell. Soldiers and horses fell down, collapsed, fell dead. Only a few remained to make the journey back. The people who were watching the war marveled, expressed their wonder, surprise at the courage of the soldiers. So the external world expressed their wonder at the kind of courage displayed by the soldiers. Indeed, their glory is undying. They praised the British soldiers by saying that their glory is permanent, undying. The poem states these noble 600 men remain worthy of honor and tribute today. Even today, we should bow down to those great men who sacrificed their lives for the sake of their country. The poem was inspired by one of the greatest calamities in British military history. On October 25, 1854, the British Light Cavalry Brigade, comprising some 600 men, charged disastrously against some 25,000 Russian soldiers. Look at this. The English soldiers were around 600, but the enemy's soldiers were 25,000 in number. Tennyson, your poet, wrote this poem on 2nd December in 1854 in response to an article in the Times about the event, about the battle. And the poem was published in the Examiner a week later on December 9, 1854. Tennyson condemns the charge attack made by the British soldiers and resultant heavy casualties suffered by the Light Brigade. So the English brigade is called Light because they were carrying just swords in their hands. Now Tennyson, observing what happened, wrote, commented that it was a terrible mistake, terrible blunder, but praised the bravery and nobility of the soldiers. Tennyson condemned the charge made by them, the order, command given to the soldiers by the commander, but he praised the bravery and nobility of the soldiers. He calls them the noble 600 who obey their orders and charge to their deaths. By obeying the orders given by the commander, the innocent noble 600 soldiers walked into their deaths. In the poem, Tennyson uses biblical allusions, references to bring home the grand sacrifice made by the soldiers. Tennyson makes it very clear that the sacrifice made by the soldiers was grand, that was great. In the poem, Tennyson uses biblical allusions, references to bring home the grand sacrifice made by the soldiers. For example, the expression the value of death is taken from the Bible. After the charge, after the war, not much remains of the 600 who rode into battle. Nearly half of them had sustained heavy injuries or been killed, while the other half felt that the whole charge had been a colossal, great waste of life, waste of time. Tennyson's use of the word left, all that was left of them, left of 600, picks upon the words used early in the stanza, canon to left of them. All that was left of them, or left of 600, goes with canon to left of them, but shifts the word's meaning from a spiritual sense to the one denoting the sacrifice the men have made. As Bertrand Russell says, the war doesn't determine who is right, the war tells us only who is left. The war doesn't tell us who is right and who is wrong, it just tells us how many are left behind. So, by writing this poem, Tennyson draws our attention to the horror of war. He tries to tell us what a colossal waste a war is. He tries to drive home the idea that a war is highly futile, doesn't serve any purpose.